There comes a time in life when you realize something painful. Sometimes you don't get cast as the villain because you did anything wrong. You get cast as the villain because you did everything right. You showed up. You gave your best. You stood tall, spoke honestly, and refused to shrink yourself to make others feel comfortable. And that scared them. See, when people can't keep up with you, when they can't match your light, your strength, your truth, they don't applaud you. They target you because it's easier to call you the problem than to admit they were never willing to grow. They couldn't match your character, so they questioned your motives. They couldn't match your confidence, so they labeled it arrogance. And before you even saw it coming, they flipped the story. You weren't the hero, you were the threat. And in their eyes, threats must be controlled or destroyed. You didn't hold back with them. You gave everything, your time, your love, your energy, your heart. You poured yourself into them without hesitation, without calculation, not because you were weak, but because that's who you are. You show up fully. You care deeply. You give more than most people even think to offer. And you didn't expect anything extravagant in return. Just honesty, effort, the same respect you gave so freely. But even that was too much for them, wasn't it? They weren't built to receive what you were willing to give. Instead of appreciating it, they questioned it. Instead of matching it, they took from it. Because deep down, they knew they couldn't offer you what you gave them. So they took what they could while pretending they were giving back. But you noticed, didn't you? Little by little, you saw the imbalance. You felt the weight of always carrying more, doing more, loving more. Still, you stayed. Still, you tried, because that's who you are. You give, even when it's not returned. The truth is, they were never on your level, and they knew it. They saw how you carried yourself, how you handled pressure, how you stood firm when life tried to knock you down. And instead of being inspired, they felt threatened. Your strength reminded them of their weakness. Your confidence made their doubt louder. Your consistency exposed their inconsistency. They couldn't keep up with the standard you set just by being yourself. So slowly, instead of rising with you, they started pulling away. Not physically at first, but emotionally. They got quieter, colder, more distant. And when you asked what was wrong, they said nothing. But deep down, they were wrestling with a truth they didn't want to face. They couldn't match you, not in effort, not in loyalty, not in vision. And rather than admit that, they began rewriting the story. They decided it was easier to tear you down than to level themselves up. That's when everything started to shift. Suddenly you were too much, too driven, too emotional, too intense. The very qualities they once admired in you became the things they criticized. Why? Because your presence forced them to confront everything they weren't. And instead of growing, they chose to deflect. They couldn't compete with your authenticity, so they questioned your intentions. They couldn't match your energy, so they called it exhausting. They couldn't stand your light, so they tried to dim it. And somewhere along the way, they flipped the script. You, the one who gave everything, became the one they blamed for everything. They painted you as difficult, demanding, even selfish, all so they wouldn't have to admit they were never really ready for someone like you. It wasn't about who you were, it was about who they weren't. And then came the part that hurt the most. Not the distance, not even the blame, but the betrayal. They didn't just leave you behind. They tried to break you on the way out. They twisted your words, questioned your character, made you feel like you were the one who needed fixing. They projected their own fears onto you. their own insecurities. And because you cared, you questioned yourself. You wondered if maybe you were too much. Maybe you did expect too much. But deep down, you knew the truth. You knew how hard you tried, how much you loved, how deeply you showed up for them. You weren't the villain. You were the one holding everything together while they slowly unraveled. And when they finally walked away, they did it like they were the victim, like you were the reason it all fell apart. But that's what people do when they can't face their own reflection. It was never you. And maybe now, with some distance, you're finally starting to see that. You weren't asking for too much. You were offering more than they were ready to receive. You weren't overreacting. You were responding to red flags they tried to hide. They made you the villain because it gave them an excuse not to grow, an excuse not to take responsibility, an excuse to leave without looking like the one who gave up. But deep down, they knew. They knew they weren't enough for you, not because you expected perfection, but because you showed up in ways they never could. You held a mirror to their lack of effort, and they couldn't handle the reflection. So they rewrote the story. They cast you as the threat, the storm, the chaos, just so they could feel like the victim. But you were never the chaos. You were the clarity they weren't ready for. They thought turning you into the villain would break you, but it did the opposite. It showed you who you are without them, strong, clear, and unstoppable. You didn't fall apart when they left. You finally had space to rise. What they called too much was just power they couldn't handle. You were never the problem. You were the proof they couldn't keep up. They didn't leave because you were wrong. They left because your truth was too real. You were the mirror they tried to avoid, the standard they couldn't fake. And now you're free to be exactly who you are without shrinking. Let them regret. You move forward because the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming everything they couldn't handle.